Group AstraZeneca and the University of Oxford say that they've jointly developed a vaccine against COVID-19, which has shown an average efficacy of 70% in trials. The British drugmaker preliminary trial results mark a fresh breakthrough in the fight against the pandemic that has killed nearly 1.4 million people and roiled the global economy.
Britain's AstraZeneca says its vaccine could be around 90% effective without any serious side effects. The vaccine was most effective when administered as a half dose followed by a full dose. Oxford professor Andrew Poland says the latest findings show an effective vaccine that will save many lives.
Intriguingly, it has an overall efficacy in our trials of 70%. But when we look into the data a bit further, in the two different dosing regimes we used, one of the dosing regimes has 90% efficacy and the other one has 62% efficacy. And the higher efficacy regime is better tolerated, and also there's a hint that it may have an impact on asymptomatic infection and therefore possibly transmission of the virus.
The vaccine, which can be refrigerated instead of needing to be frozen, has been praised for being affordable compared to its competitors.
The vaccine is not very expensive to manufacture, and also no profit will be made during the pandemic period, which also helps to keep the price of this vaccine very low.
Poland hopes a speedy vaccine rollout could allow health services to return to normality.
What was the most interesting to me is that all of the vaccines are preventing the more severe end of the spectrum, the sort of hospitalizations and the severe disease, so the ones with the higher WHO score. And that, to me, means that whichever of the vaccines we could deploy, we're likely to be able to prevent people going into hospital, clogging up, in this country, the NHS, and allow us to at least get that bit of the system back to normal.
AstraZeneca is the third vaccine to show a high degree of efficacies after Pfizer and Moderna announced positive results of their candidates earlier this month. The drug maker is expected to seek emergency use listing from the World Health Organization to accelerate vaccine availability in low-income countries, and plans to produce over 3 billion doses of the vaccine in 2021, pending regulatory approval.
Professor of Vaccinology at Wits University Shabir Madhi is on Skype to share some insights on this story. Thanks so much indeed for joining us. Always good to talk to you. So AstraZeneca, we say 70%, and partly because we've heard the other studies have had 95%. So in our minds, we think that it's not as good, but 70% is not bad at all.
So good evening, Peter. So certainly a few weeks ago, before Pfizer and Moderna released their results, if you had told any scientist that the first generation of COVID-19 vaccines would provide 90% protection, everyone would have grabbed it with two hands. And the story doesn't end there, because a vaccine that's got 70% effectiveness or efficacy, that can be rolled out much sooner, where we can scale up manufacture and end up vaccinating a much larger number of people over a short period of time, has much greater public health value than a vaccine that has got 90% efficacy, but that might only become available after 12 to 18 months. So I think the efficacy itself is one component of it, but another important element is the cost of the vaccine, the timeliness of rollout, and how easily it is to deploy it into the communities.
And talking about deployment, I believe that it doesn't need to be stored at such cold temperatures in comparison to the other two.
That's correct. So this vaccine can be stored similar to the influenza vaccine. So it's a type of vaccine that could be distributed through pharmacies, through your public health clinic, your primary healthcare clinics, or any other facility that has got basic refrigeration facilities. Unlike the Pfizer vaccine, unfortunately, which needs to be stored at minus 70 degrees, and those type of facilities are simply unavailable on a mass scale in countries such as South Africa, and in fact in most other countries.
And I'm told the Pfizer drug has a shorter shelf life.
Correct. So it needs to be stored at minus 70 degrees, and it's only stable at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius for about 24 hours. The Moderna vaccine is stable at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius for up to 30 days. But this particular vaccine remains stable at 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. That's its storage requirements.
I also understand that with this trial, they're still waiting for some more results, so that actually we might get a better picture soon.
Correct. So as Prof. Pollard pointed out, one of the intriguing findings from the study, which was really inadvertent, was that about 3,500 participants ended up receiving a low-dose first vaccine. So the strength of that first vaccine was about half the strength of what they were meant to receive. And what consequently transpired is when that group was analyzed separately, they ended up reporting a much higher vaccine efficacy than a group that received 2 standard doses of vaccine. The efficacy in a group that received an initial low-dose vaccine, followed by a standard dose vaccine, was 90%. So that also has got tremendous implications in terms of when there is limited quantity of vaccine, we would be able to vaccinate more people simply because we require less vaccine, at least to start off with. And obviously it's also got cost implications.
Do we have an understanding yet in terms of the distribution of this vaccine, in terms of, we've known that people of colour tend to be more vulnerable, and do we know yet whether this vaccine acts differently for different population groups?
So unfortunately at this point not. And so as you perhaps know, this is one of the vaccines that is currently being evaluated in South Africa. So hopefully we'll get some answers in terms of the performance of this vaccine in our own context, or at least in African context, in the next few months. But right now, we don't know whether there are going to be any differences in terms of the immune response to the vaccine, as well as to whether there's going to be difference in regard to whether the vaccine protects differentially in different ethnic groups. So those are studies that are required, and those studies are ongoing.
All right. So, I mean, the UK, this drug maker is saying 200 million doses by the end of 2020. I mean, that's literally weeks away. Is that doable?
It is. And the reason why it's doable is that the ability to scale up manufacture of this vaccine is much easier than the ability to scale up manufacture of your messenger RNA vaccines, the vaccines that are being developed by Pfizer and Moderna. In addition to which, I think what we need to appreciate is that AstraZeneca, in partnership with other companies, including the Serum Institute in India, have actually already been developing the manufacturing facilities. So they were going out at risk in terms of setting up those manufacturing facilities so that as soon as the first evidence becomes available that the vaccine is safe and that it actually works and protects against COVID-19, that they would be able to start manufacturing almost immediately. So the manufacturing facilities have largely been already set up, which allows them to scale up production. And one of the beauties of this vaccine, as you've heard from Prof. Sarah Gilbert, is that you're able to scale up production fairly rapidly. So unlike Pfizer and Moderna that have indicated, between the two of them, they probably would be able to produce just under 2 billion doses of vaccine by the end of 2021. AstraZeneca and its other partners have indicated they would be able to produce as much as 3 billion doses by the end of 2021, which is good news because it means vaccine will probably become available sooner than later for many countries.
All right. Remind us again the differences in the, I don't know which word to use, but it's kind of the way that the drugs work, the Moderna one versus the AstraZeneca one.
Right. So the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine is known as a messenger RNA vaccine, and that is really a novel technology. And what it really does is that it takes a genetic component of the virus, which codes for what is known as a spike protein. It injects that into a muscle, and then once in a muscle cell, it actually makes use of the cell machinery of the human cell to produce the protein. So the coding for that protein is inserted into the human cell. The human cell produces the protein, and that protein is then expressed to the immune system, and the immune system mounts an immune response against that protein because it's considered as being foreign. It's recognized as being foreign. The Oxford vaccine, essentially it uses a similar sort of approach, except the manner in which its genetic material is delivered into the cells is using what is known as a non-replicating virus that doesn't cause illness in humans. So a person is injected with the same sort of genetic material that's now been inserted into a virus rather than being injected directly with a genetic material. And then it goes through the same process of the cells recognizing the genetic material, and the cells itself starts producing the protein, which is coded for by the genetic material. And that protein is again expressed to the immune system, and that's how your immune system mounts a response, including antibodies against the protein. So when an individual is exposed to the virus now, those antibodies can act immediately in terms of neutralizing the virus or destroying the virus.
All right. So a vaccine, from what I have always understood it, is it's more preventative. You apply the vaccine in advance, and hopefully when the virus arrives, it knows what to do. What do you do with people who are ill and perhaps in hospital? What will the vaccine be able to help them?
So unfortunately not. So as you correctly point out, the vaccine is really sort of almost in a sense preparing an army of soldiers so that they're ready, and once actually exposed to the virus, they can sort of tackle the virus and destroy it. Unfortunately, when a person is already infected, at that stage it's too late to immunize a person, because it usually takes 2 weeks for that immune system to kick in upon the first exposure to the vaccine. And for many of these vaccines, you need a second dose, which is given about 3 weeks later. So the immune response to the vaccine would be too delayed to have any sort of material effect in someone that is already infected with the virus. But there is another class of biologicals that are becoming available now, which are known as monoclonal antibodies. So this is sort of antibody that's prepared in the laboratory that targets the same protein of the virus. And if given early enough, there's evidence to indicate that it can attenuate the clinical cause of the illness. But not for individuals that are already hospitalized. Individuals that have got a mild illness, by giving these monoclonal antibodies, you can attenuate the clinical cause of the illness.
All right, and I suppose that the approach is going to be to vaccinate vulnerable groups and medical staff first.
It depends on the amount of vaccine which does become available. Right now, most countries are expecting to get vaccine perhaps for about 20% of the population, in which situation you obviously would need to undertake some sort of prioritization. And as you correctly identified, the groups that are considered to be priority for vaccination by the WHO are healthcare workers and people over the age of 65 and individuals with comorbidities such as hypertension and diabetes.
All right, and perhaps as a final question, I mean, as we see what's happened in France, happened in the UK and America with this second lockdown, I'm worried again, given the answer you've just given me now, about if you've got the virus, it's not going to help. So that this vaccine, even if it does come, there is a group of people, and it's a large number, that actually just have to go through it, and that's it, that they can't be saved.
So that's unfortunately true. But at the same time, I think we need to recognize that the majority of healthy individuals that do become infected with the virus, and when I'm talking of the majority, I'm talking of above 90%. Fortunately, they might have an asymptomatic infection, or they might have a mild illness which is self-limiting. And again, that's another reason why we're wanting to prioritize those groups, because our immediate focus is about saving lives. And to be able to save as many lives as possible, we need to target those individuals that are at greatest risk of dying from COVID-19 or being hospitalized with COVID-19. And those often are people over the age of 65 and individuals with this sort of comorbidity.
All right, okay, that's where we'll leave it. Thank you so much indeed. Great news. We must welcome it all. And it sounds like this new drug by AstraZeneca might give us a solution much quicker, actually. But thank you so much for your insights.
A pleasure.
All right. That was Professor of Vaccinology at Wits University Shabir Madhi speaking to us about this new drug. 70% efficacy rate, but it could actually be more readily available to us. So because of the way that it can be mass produced and also rolled out And there's this talk that 200 million doses could be ready before the end of the year. And remember, we're at the end of November already almost, so we're talking 6 weeks.